Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. I'm happy to introduce today's moderator, Mariusz Galczynski. He joined FIU's Office of Global Learning Initiatives as the Managing Director of the Comparative and International Education Society. He builds on his active involvement with that same society. He previously was a student representative on the board of directors, the chair of the New Scholars Committee, and the conference coordinator for that organization's 2011 conference in Montreal. He is earning a PhD in Educational Studies from McGill University in Montreal. He holds a master's degree in Humanities and a bachelor's in Literary Studies from the University of Texas at Dallas. He is formerly a secondary English language arts teacher. His diverse research interests and publications include comparative education in global perspective, interdisciplinary multicultural education, social justice and equity, teacher education, and assessment. At the university level, he has led courses in education and development, multicultural education, and educational research methods. His recent scholarship includes Redefining Multicultural Education, Inclusion, and the Right to be Different, a 2014 book with Dr. Ratna Ghosh, and contributions to the volume Crafting a Global Field, 6 Decades of the Comparative International Education Society. He is also a Jeopardy champion. Thank you for being here, Mariusz.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you all for coming today and spending your lunch together. I hope that you will just jump into the conversation whenever you feel like you have something to say. You don't even have to raise your hand if you're comfortable. Just the whole point is to have a dialogue today on the topic and in response to the article that you have in front of you, which is really short. So even if you never read it, you can skim through it and get it really fast. The topic today, or the way I've reframed the response, is to talk about, looks like all of you, or most of you, millennials as global citizens in real life. I had to throw the hashtag in there because I know that you care about that. And also, according to some definitions, I get to still count as a millennial. So I have arguments with my friends about that. So maybe you're judging me like, oh, that's sad. But no, according to the definition, I just made it in there. And yes, and I also work in the Office of Global Learning that puts on this whole series. So thank you, Eric, because I know he does a great job getting you all here and advertising. So thanks for coming out. Okay. Oh, the clicker. And the camera looks good? Lighting? Okay. We didn't test that in advance. All right. So first, I just wanted to introduce myself, although Eric already did a great job. If any of you are active on Twitter, and I apologize again, millennials, I don't have an Instagram or a Snapchat, maybe in the future. But right now, I can only focus on one professionally, and that's Twitter. And if you are engaged on that, you can follow me at Mariusz, my first name, EDU for education. And of course, I already tweeted about today. So if you're taking pictures or you want to make your comments digitally, that's great. I go to a conference every 2 years that it's all teachers who are on Twitter, and it's awesome how those people who are looking for that content really pick it up. So I encourage you if you feel comfortable. I won't yell at you for having your phone out. And, at the top, the background is exactly the book that I co-authored in 2014 with Dr. Ratna Ghosh, who is an expert in the field of multicultural education. I was very lucky because she asked me to join her for the new edition of her book, where we tried to make things a little bit more practical for teachers, not just the actual concepts. Normally, I'd be teaching a course on it for a semester. So today I'm going to introduce some concepts, but mostly skim over them and keep them at at a distance because we don't have time to really, really unpack them. And we want to respond to the author who wrote this New York Times editorial. But I will pull 2 quick things from the book. So the first is just a definition. The title, as you can see, is Redefining Multicultural Education. And the subtitle is the right inclusion and the right to be different. And the basic concept there is that really, if we're going to acknowledge that we live in multicultural societies and we want success, that you have 2 competing rights at the same time. One is the right to be different, and if that's recognized, that will promote actually the right to fit in with everyone, which is inclusion. And so they kind of go hand in hand. Does that make sense? Do you have a question? You can jump out and be like, no, I hate that. Oh, so you love it. Great. Thank you. Okay. So that's, and I'm not going to focus on that too much, but I think it's important, especially when you break it down this way. So some of the tweets I post go along with articles and current events, and I use the hashtag the right to be different, highlighting all different ways that being different in ways that society seems to care about, whether that's gender or your sexuality or the class you're from or your age, which is also an important difference, especially for our discussion today, that is a comparative term. When you say something's different, you're saying it's different from something else. So the perspective at which you're looking at something really makes a difference. Who is looking at it and getting to say that it's different or that difference is important? And so when you break it down, you start thinking like, okay, every time something becomes controversial or it's a real hot topic, who is that a hot topic for and why? And in whose perspective? And why can't we talk about it? Or why should we talk about it? And people are behind those decisions in society that kind of move forward or stall a conversation. So that's enough as the background for now. I'll come back to this a little bit, but do you have any questions so far? I explained it really well, right? Okay, great. And for those on video, the people nodded. Okay, so back to this article with this terrifying graphic that I don't know what it's supposed to communicate, but the topic is, why are millennials wary of freedom? What do you think of that title? Yes. Okay. Okay, so the title threw you off from the beginning. You thought it was going to be freedom of independence. What do you mean by that? Oh. Okay. Okay. Okay, I think the author hits on that a little bit, that there is some of that, but he makes a big connection to political factors that he's then going to discuss too. So, right, what else? Anyone else have a reaction to the title?
I think it sort of assumes, especially in the first paragraph, that freedom is equal to democracy.
Okay.
And that's not, I don't believe that to be the case at all.
Okay, so you're saying that there's implied, especially if we bring in the political tie from having read the article, that there's equating freedom with democracy.
Yes.
Okay, and you were raising your hand.
Yeah, just by reading the title, like freedom, that's it's a very Americanized word. Like when you hear freedom, you think like, oh, it's the United States coming here with the big guns, like spreading democracy on the planet. So that's what I thought it was going to be about.
Great, so you saw the title and you thought America.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, based off the title, when I read it alone, I was about the same thing, let's do the whole freedom for America, but then reading skimming through the first few paragraphs, and I got how at least the author saying that the government should be able to regulate certain types of speech. I also feel like that's something that plays a factor into our generation's trend now, is that people need to be watchful of what they say, even though we have the whole freedom of speech as something to, around us.
Great, so the freedom also feeds into rights and what rights and how to express those and what that means for different generations, I suppose. So, and again, I picked this, I was hoping people would really turn out because it's written almost to you, like basically millennials, why are you afraid of freedom? What's your problem? And here's what's wrong with you. And so I used a different graphic from another New York Times article about millennials that was on the poster. And basically I'm going to summarize all that this author says about you. And again, what's wrong with your generation? You have lower self-confidence and independence than past generation, and it's getting worse. You have higher levels of anxiety. And keep in mind that the statistics and surveys that the author references, sometimes it says that it's gone from 15% to 20% over the last 5 or 10 years. So 20% could still be a small number, but for our sake of argument, we're going to say that it is increasing, even if it doesn't mean the majority of people in this room or in a certain age group at all. You're overly sensitive. I can tell you've been offended by some of my jokes already. You're skeptical of free speech. You're like, boo, I don't want that. No, no thanks. You think that colleges or universities should restrict speech that's purposely offensive. And he says that's something wrong with you. And that democracy is a bad idea. Okay, so I think, and some of you, did you have a reaction as you were reading? Because I'm using pretty much his exact language. Yes. No, you're not raising your hand?
No. I'm just nodding and agreeing.
You're nodding in agreement.
I'm enjoying the presentation.
Okay, but he nailed it. Like, do you feel that way about yourself?
No, but those around me.
Those around you. Okay, so tell me one thing that really resonated, if you don't mind.
Well, the skeptical of free speech, though, that's a bit that I don't see it. I don't see that happening with people.
Okay, so you're saying that one, so let's put it aside for a second. Which ones do you say are like, yeah, that's definitely happening around me?
Okay. The higher levels of anxiety, lower self-confidence, and independence.
Okay, and give me an example.
People, or at least I'd say like my generation, people of my age group, seem to be more worried about, I perceive them to be more worried about the future than it seems like our predecessors were.
I like that. So there's anxiety, there's less self-confidence, but you kind of took it to the next level. You're saying, but they're more worried about the future. Okay, interesting. What else? Some of, yes?
I think it's definitely true, personally, that people, millennials, especially our generation, are kind of getting skeptical of the free speech and are overly sensitive because we are entering this era of political correctness, which I think I can totally see both sides where, yes, we definitely need to be respectful, and there are horrible hate groups out there that are spewing awful language that should not be used. But then there's also this idea in which everyone is entitled to their opinions, but when do people's opinions infringe on other people's rights?
Okay, so you said that really beautifully. So you see that resonating that, yeah, overall that's true. What I also noticed you doing is that you really are thinking about the issue. Where do I stand? At what cost do I want to emphasize free speech? And I don't think you're saying you're skeptical of it, like you don't believe in it. At the same time, you can see the side that says we have to protect that and really fight for it, because where do we draw the line? Yep. Great. What else? Yes.
I mean, going back to the title and then drawing from this graphic, it's difficult, and it's when you tie it up to like millennials are wary of freedom, I think it's too general because it's a little subjective, right? That's like a picture of what you think every millennial is. And I think, in my opinion, it's just, if this is happening, if people feel this way, or if you see that from research, then why don't you adapt or change with that change happening? If it's something of evolution, just with the time, I would think.
Okay, so you're saying that even you agree with the point, or you get the point that's trying to be made?
I get it.
You get the point.
I get the point.
But at the same time, you're already like jumping ahead, which is okay. That you feel the author isn't maybe contributing some solutions or a bigger perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if you're standing with the question that you're presenting, the author meaning, and if you're presenting the parts with that question, I think you have to present some solution, in my opinion.
Okay. Yes.
I think with the free speech thing, I guess the question is hate speech free speech, and is speech oppressive? And if speech can be oppressive, should it be free? Do we have the freedom to oppress? I mean, slave owners used to believe, if you don't let me have slaves, then you're oppressing my freedom. Their freedom to oppress. And so if freedom or if hate speech is oppressive, then I personally think hate speech should be restricted. And so in that sense, I don't think oppressive speech is free speech.
Right. But see, the author doesn't want to hear your opinion. He wants to judge you and say, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want freedom?
Well, I'm also on the borderline of millennials, and just like you.
Okay. And then, can I do one more? You had your hand up, so maybe both of you?
I think that was you first.
Go ahead. Oh.
agree that the author is on point because maybe he's viewing it from the point of how now us millennials we're more likely to express our freedom of speech on social media.
Huh?
And whereas comparing it to the baby boomers or generations before us, they didn't have social media. So it's more easier for us millennials to express ourselves on social media where we're hidden and not exposed publicly, and then be subjected to some type of controversy or retaliation. So that empowers us, whereas being publicly out in the open. So when it comes to a political stand that's out in the open, and millennials tend to not gravitate to that.
Okay, that's a really cool point. I like that. So bringing in social media and how, in a way, this generation has had access to a way of communicating free speech that other generations didn't have, but in a very individual way, I would add, too. And that, so now maybe you take a step back and you're thinking like, okay, well, I can say whatever I want. What's the good of that? Okay, yes, sorry, in the back, and then after. Or do you want to jump right on this point?
Yeah.
Okay, jump in.
The only thing that I have an issue with that entire sentence, I guess, would be right now, social media is a thing for every generation. It's not just millennials. Everyone's adjusting to it because this is new. So Donald Trump, he goes on social media to discuss his issues. He's not a millennial. So now we're kind of having that situation where if we find out something through our president, right, that's through social media for the most part. So we're going to social media in order to get the communication that we need to live our lives.
Okay, so you're saying, yes, I kind of agree with this,
Yes,
and times are changing. So people are acting differently and thinking differently. Did you want to jump in?
So, writing off what you said with social media, I agree that the whole social media plays a huge role, especially in our generation of millennials, because like now us growing up is when Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat was all introduced. So you're right that Donald Trump, he may have access to Twitter, he knows how to use it, but I feel like since we're the ones that were first brought into it and we're so exposed to it, it makes such a bigger difference on us for like levels of anxiety and lower self-confidence, because now you have the voices and opinions of people on a global scale versus my dad's generation, who's coming up, where all he would have is like his local community and their voices, and like all like having to read a newspaper to like understand what's happening. But now that you wake up and you have your Facebook notifying you on what Donald Trump said, or Twitter, or your Snapchat, and like all these different notifications, and you're hearing from so many people all around the world, that you kind of feel like, you know, like you're being attacked in so many different ways. It's just like, I don't know, I feel like the whole, and like the freedom of hate, all like the freedom of speech, how people have like the whole willingness to be able to say hateful things. I think that also falls like, I guess like on your own opinion, I guess. What you might find hateful in a certain speech, I may not find hateful. You know, like I guess it just all matters.
And that's good. I like how you tied that back to what I started with when you're thinking about there's always a perspective. So even deciding something is hate speech, to whom? Exactly. Like, do we all agree on what that is? Interesting. And I also just want to touch on the point you brought up too, that we're now seeing kind of freedom of speech in a global way, where it's not just us here in the U.S., but you're seeing other parts of the world. All right, I don't want to cut you off, so you make the last point and we'll move on to the next slide.
I wanted to touch upon the democracy is a bad idea statement.
Yes, that's almost the first sentence of the article, so good. All right.
Well, sort of the like general idea of democracy is like the people rule the people, so like we represent ourselves, but what's happening now is that instead of us electing a representative to represent us, that representative is representing the people that are paying him or her to do what they want so that they can exceed.
Okay, so now you're bringing up issues that maybe that anxiety or independence is coming from because you know how things really work, that there's issues of representation, and that even in a democracy where people are supposed to be speaking for you, you see them being a little bit more than necessarily influenced by lobbyists or constituents or where the money is. Good point. Good point. Okay, so let's go just a little deeper into the article and pull out some things that the author is claiming. So in general, the consensus seemed to be that that description of millennials, yes, some of those things are true. Maybe the points aren't that well defined, but in general, we agree. So what is it that makes everyone kind of at this millennial generation kind of at the same place? And here's where the author is again saying that, well, you are afraid. I propose that the answer is fear, the ultimate enemy of freedom. So what do you think, can you paraphrase what the author really means here?
I don't think it's fear, I think it's the not knowing.
No, don't disagree yet. Just say, paraphrase. What does he mean? Yeah.
Well, if you're afraid of something, then you're way more easy to be like taken advantage of, and like especially with like say terrorism, it's so prominent, especially it's being broadcasted now. We see it so often, especially in social media. We are now terrified of something like that happening in our backyards. So because this is happening, it's going to be way easier to start creating laws to control gun control and control we saw it when 9/11 happened and how there was a huge cut down on security in airports. So basically, whether or not you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, fear is definitely used to control people.
Okay. That's great. So fear is that motivation that's driving the way we think about kind of decisions about the world and how our country should function. Great. So now you say, yeah, but no.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just saying that maybe it's not entirely fear. Maybe it's also the not knowing of what the apostle often could be. Because yeah, when you're scared, you want to hold closer to yourself and be more on the defensive side. But I feel like it's also the not knowing of what's going to happen is what makes people so scared. That's what adds into it.
Okay, so you would say that there's uncertainty.
Yeah.
And that for many people means they are afraid. Okay. Okay. How do you feel about this claim that fear is the enemy of freedom? Did any of you have a strong reaction to that when you read it? No. Can I pick on you again? Why did you? So you thought, yeah.
Oh, I disagree, but not very strongly.
Okay. You disagree, but not very strongly. And what's your kind of instincts?
Having trouble processing it.
Okay. It's okay. All right. So it doesn't make all that much sense to you. Yeah. All right.
I agree with him.
Yeah.
Who's jumping? Jump in. Yeah.
I agree with that statement.
That.
That the fear is the ultimate enemy of freedom. Because with fear is enslaving. The second that fear comes upon you, you immediately put limits on yourself. And so you can't act upon the behaviors of freedom if you're scared.
Okay. Okay. So then, do you think millennials are putting limits on themselves? We can ask that to everyone. Because that's good. That was a really good way of saying it. That when you're afraid, you put limits on yourself, and so then that freedom doesn't exist. So now back to millennials. What's wrong with the world today? Are they putting too many limits on themselves?
I think the author's saying that we live tough enough, we're just we're too sensitive. Yeah. I think that's what he's saying.
Okay, so toughen up. Yes. And you agree or you disagree? You don't know. Okay, you're listening.
I like freedom, but I think he's trying to tell us of a trade-off between security and freedom.
Okay. Okay, so trade-off. Yes.
If we go on with what the author is trying to say, fear, I agree with the claim fear is the ultimate enemy of freedom. But humans, we want to be together. Even the loneliest loner wants to find another lonely loner. It's just, humans need humans. So I see that as the point. I don't agree, but I see it. I understand, the claim of fear is uniting everybody. So we're young people. We're afraid of this. Let's unite. We don't know what to do, but we're afraid though.
Okay.
So I can see that.
Okay, well that's a good transition to another quote in this article, where so somehow, and I'll let you want to jump in? Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I thought about it a little bit more after they spoke, and my problem, I guess, was with it that if I feel like he's presenting it as fear is uniting millennials, and us uniting due to fear. I feel like if we accept that, he's kind of doing like a little mental loophole to get us to accept that that it also is infringing upon the freedom of others. It's actually he's afraid that we're going to get together and take away his freedom.
Yes?
Yeah, I think he's using a lot of things to attack us. Like he's twisting it from his own point of view, like calling it sensitive and this and that. But really we're just, I don't think it's fear, we're angry. We're tired of like things just, sliding and like yes, some things are detrimental to mental health. They're not sensitive, we're tired.
That's interesting, and I would just want to point out that you're saying that the younger generation is saying they're tired of kind of some of these things that are out there guiding their life. And already by the time you're right now at university age, or you're in university at any point, that you're like, I'm already tired of all that, that's very interesting. Yes?
My initial reaction, maybe I based it everything to what you're saying, but what are you fearing?
What are we fearing? So you're not afraid?
No, I'm not saying I'm not afraid. I just want to know what is he referring to as what are we fearing? Like, what does he think we're fearing?
Okay, so you're saying that he doesn't make clear what is it that is keeping you up at night?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
That's the problem with some of the terms, though. They're very vague. Like, they're not specific. So it's like, even though some of the things that he's saying are true, they're not true all the time in every situation.
Okay, so you're saying the author is really relying on generalizations.
He's generalizing big time.
Generalizing big time. Say that again?
He's just trying to point out that there's something that you're afraid of, but it's up to you to find out what it is that you're afraid of so you can take control of it. Maybe that's what I was trying to do.
Okay, so you're saying that he's putting it out there, but he's trying to motivate you.
Exactly. Maybe there's a little underlying motivation there. Because he's not being specific as to what you're supposed to be afraid of, but maybe by him saying that you're afraid of something, it kind of wakes you up and you're like, oh shit, and then I'm scared of something like
Okay, so just to move us a little bit further forward, so we're still pretty much agreeing that millennials, although it's hard to generalize, there are some really shared feelings and experiences we're having, and most of us, or you, seem to be kind of reacting in a collective way or the same way, right? They're like patterns repeat. And some of that, for example, in this particular line, saying that like, okay, so the feelings and experiences that were once considered parts of everyday life, such as being offended by someone's political views, are now more likely to be treated as detrimental to mental health. So that's one of the more specific examples he uses. How do you feel about this one? Yes? Yes.
So when I hear all that, I can feel that the term should be sensitive, not necessarily is a bad thing. I think that this generation are more, at least I hear more of this self-awareness idea and holistic and all just young groups doing more of volunteer work and helping causes and yes, maybe they are more sensitive, like if they affect them, like he was mentioning mental health, but I see it in a positive way.
Okay, so can I summarize and say that what you said was that millennials maybe seem to be a bit more empathetic. They're offended because they're thinking about how someone else feels about those words. And you said they're spending their time doing activities like volunteering and thinking about things more holistically. Yeah? More or less? Yes?
I think this ties in with the tab earlier about the limits.
Okay, but you're like, wait, but there's limits. So give me an example.
Like hate speech. I mean, it is relative, and okay, a perfect example. My brother, we have very different political views, and he says some things that I really don't agree with, and I want to rip his hair off, but I don't. That's his perspective, that's his view, and I think that sometimes, especially on social media, people attack each other just because they have different views.
Okay.
that's their view, that's their perspective. You may want to kill them, but don't be so sensitive just because you can't make them see you see. It's just you're different. It's how you were, your upbringing, your environment, how you study, where you study, everything is different. You can't attack someone and throw like hate speech at them just because they don't see your point of view.
Okay.
And like, they get overly sensitive.
Okay, so people are willing to engage on social media and like really spew stuff out there, and sometimes that causes, really difficult situations. So then I'm curious, how does that relate to the author's argument about you're afraid? You're so afraid you can't act or can't do anything. But people are doing things and they're saying things.
I think the fear is the fact that, like she was saying earlier, millennials didn't cause a lot of the problems and don't necessarily feel like they're in control of them.
Okay.
And like she said about, the oligarchy that basically runs the government, and we don't have a representative democracy. So yeah, those things can cause a lot of fear in any generation, especially millennials that are just coming into the fold and seeing like, the generations before us caused all these problems, and we don't really have a lot of control of it because we don't have a democracy, we don't have a republic, and so yeah, I think just not having that control of the future. So I do think it's finger pointing because millennials do need to be angry, and do need to be angry, and do need to stand up to them.
Very interesting. But I'm going to call you a baby for saying those things in the voice of the author, because instead of doing something about it, you're at a university, which is the worst place for you to be. Colleges and universities exacerbate the problems of dependence or being afraid of freedom, like the author's lumping all these things, because they promote a culture of victimhood. So you're outraged, but you're a victim. Can you say that again? Because maybe
he's being paid by the oligarchy to say that.
Well, that's an accusation. I tweeted him. He's going to watch this, and he's going to think he's being paid by the oligarchy to say that. Okay. But let's unpack this one a little bit, because this is pretty extreme, and he kind of just throws it in there, and it really affects all of you, because you're at a point where you can speak to this population. Do you feel that FIU in particular is making you feel more like a victim?
Well, I think that to an extent, but not really.
Okay.
Basically, I think that colleges and universities are a point when, for the first time, basically in our lives, like we are put in this beautiful little bubble of, because most universities are very liberal, and so we are now surrounded by all these people who have basically very similar opinions to us. So it gives us kind of this idea and sense of power that like, oh my gosh, all these people think just like me, we're gonna take over and let's have all these really great rallies, which I think is really great for promoting like advancing different political ideals. But there's also a sense where like comedians have a problem with coming to universities because you get so worked up over little bits of jokes that are supposed to be funny. And so but some people find things funny and some people don't. And so some people are saying, oh my gosh, you can't say any of that, rather than just saying, okay, I'm not listening to this.
Okay, so you felt that in your experience here, that sometimes a comedian, for example, couldn't come to campus, or something would be too controversial?
Not necessarily here, but I feel that at a lot of universities.
Okay. Other places you visit? Yes.
I feel like talking about free speech is a very important distinction between things that are subjective, just a matter of personal preference, and things that are hurtful to other people. So, if I don't like something simply because I don't think it's funny, that's one thing, I will leave. But if someone is making, a racist or a sexist joke, I feel like that's not just hurting me, that's hurting other people. And I feel like that's more important than those people who find it funny. I feel like the pain of some people is more important than them.
Okay, so that doesn't sound like fear. That sounds like a pretty rational reason for why you would say that maybe there should be limits on certain ways of expressing yourself. Like, for example, and then the example you gave was a really good one. I was like this, but that didn't sound like fear to me, and that's something I want to point out. Okay, I'm going to say you, and then we'll go to the back, okay?
I think there's this need to recognize, like, mental health and sexual harassment and like everything that's been suppressed by the generation prior. But he's right in that there is a culture of victimhood, but that's again not our fault. That's people recognizing, oh, okay, there is this epidemic of mental health and anxiety and all these things that we weren't acknowledging before. But let's call them victims instead of empowering us and being like, I think there should be a different approach.
Okay, that's interesting. I like this. I like the intergenerational comparisons because I'm hearing conversations I have with my own parents sometimes about whose fault it is and what we need to say. Go ahead.
Ultimately, I feel like we're losing, the sense of, being strong and feeling empowered, and it's being replaced with being overly sensitive and feeling entitled that everyone here has to, be nice to you. Like, my mom used to say, like, people don't have to be nice to you, but they have to respect you. Like, people don't have to like you, but, now I feel like everyone expects everyone has to like me. I have to fit in. I have to feel, like everyone has to respect like my views, and I feel like a lot of people feel as though any little friction against what they feel is like a personal attack on them. Like it's like all of our egos just became like too tenuous to withstand any pressure whatsoever. And I feel like one of the reasons why he says colleges and universities just add to the problem is because you have to think about the fact that for a lot of people, like for me especially, like this is like your first time like being away on your own. Like you don't have your parents with you. Like you're trying to find your way as an adult. You're living on your own. You're being asked what you feel about politics and real world decisions and things like that. And it's hard. It's hard to navigate, especially with like how they treat us as being like open sensitive, everyone is special and everything. Now it's like you have like these little bubbles that you used to grow up at home. Everyone around you for the most part probably thought, and held the same views as you. Now you're going to this place where everybody's different cultures, different backgrounds, different political views, everything. And now it's like, okay, now I have to deal with everybody talking about all these things that go completely against what my mom was saying, but now I also have to feel like I have to find my voice too.
Okay. So did you hear on that side of the room what she was saying? Great. Yes.
I just wanted to say I loved everything you said. I loved everything you said because you said it so well. And you know what, listening to you actually made me think that probably the problem with the author is that he's not meeting us where we're at.
But he's at a university. It says that he's a professor of philosophy at North Dakota State University. So maybe he just needs to come to FIU to hear all of you.
No, but that's not what I mean. What I mean by him not meeting us where we're at is that he is where he's at in his life, in his thinking, and he's not coming down to where we're at. That's what I mean. So he's not meeting us where we're at to understand. So he's speaking from where he's at in his perspective and his way of seeing things and where he's at in his life. He's forgotten what it was like to be here.
Okay, so you're saying that millennials in a way are not only thinking about where they're at, but also kind of what the other generations did and like what they're thinking now. But he's not doing the reverse, where he's just kind of judging, but not necessarily remembering well. And I think you made a good point in the sense of, well, what other time would you really spend thinking about life and how other people feel and where you stand other than that moment where you actually leave the nest, more or less, right? You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I feel like he's blaming a lot of stuff on like millennials, but I feel like he assumes that it's like our generation that's coming out, like we're we're traumatized and we're like victimized and whatever. But I feel like he's assuming too much, like as if the past generation didn't have those problems. This problem, it's not new. Like the past generation, their attitude that they tell us suck it up, that's the attitude that they had growing up. So it's not to say that they didn't have those problems. They just had that mentality that they can't talk about it, they can't get help for it because they had to suck it up.
Okay, and it's interesting you said like this problem is not new, and I think also there we started talking about lots of different things. So what do you really mean is the problem? What is, and you don't have to answer maybe, because I think people understood you. So like, what do we mean this? This problem is not new.
To answer your question, possibly, I think the problem is the way how we are adjusting to society. So society adjusted in past generations to a different way, and when he addresses, this detrimental to mental health, well, back then, certain political figures or people who gravitated to certain politics, whether Democratic or Republicans, they did receive, attacks, but it wasn't where that individual had the freedom to file a report and say I'm being discriminated against because of my political party. Whereas now, there has through that time, and now there's been a movement of civil rights and being able to have more freedom of speech. So I think he's tying in with how society has transcended and how the approach is now, where nowadays, like this whole issue with sexual harassment and the Me Too movement, well, sexual harassment has existed, it's just how society has addressed it from past generations, and how now us millennials, he's probably implying that millennials are more likely to come out and say they're being victimized. So like colleges, I remember when I first came to FIU, there was a course that we needed to take on sexual harassment and stop the sexual harassment with professors in colleges. So I think that's probably one of the secretly examples that he may be using as to why universities have contributed to us, being victimized.
It's interesting. Okay, so the problem overall is change or adjusting to that change. And it was even interesting how in talking about that, you said that, so we're identifying it, we're acting on it, we're stopping it. It sounds like millennials are doing a lot of things, or even just everyone actually in society, not sitting there being afraid. But, I'm leading you a little bit too much now. You've been holding your hand up.
I don't think so. The problem is using all the same words that people use to trivialize women's issues and black issues, and using all these words to make us look crazy.
Have you guys ever felt that? Like when you're in a discussion, an argument with your parents, and they just make you feel like you're the crazy one? You've been there? Happens. Yes.
My point is, where I'm getting from everyone is that there are a lot of issues that are like global and everything, women's issues, women deal with a lot, and there's been a lot of movement. I think that specifically the author isn't talking about these things because when we think about a lot of the issues with women and all these things have been increased because of since Trump's administration's entrance, we have the Women's March and everything happens every year. We have a lot of issues that people are now starting to get more politically involved. When I think of that, what he's talking about specifically is more like the minimal issues. For example, there's this video on YouTube, really, really dumb video. It says how to get offended. And it shows this guy basically getting offended by every little thing. For example, say something like you're offering your friend some milk, it's 2% milk. And then your friend will be like, oh, I'm offended that you would offer this to me. He's like, well, don't you like 2% milk or something? He was like, yeah, but what if I liked whole milk? You didn't do that kind of thing. So I think this issue that he's talking about is drawn more towards like the smaller things, because you can talk to someone, you can be in a group, you can be discussing something with someone, and in the back of your mind you're thinking, what can go wrong in this conversation to offend someone I don't even know.
Okay, so that was interesting that you're kind of sussing out that maybe millennials do have more anxiety and they care about certain things and they get offended, but they tend to be the smaller issues as opposed to like the big issues, which seem to be something that they spend significant time thinking about and unpacking the complexities of and thinking critically about.
I think this statement on colleges and universities might also refer to just stopping certain hate speech groups from coming to campus. And,
yes.
And back to the freedom of speech thing, everyone individually should have their freedom of speech. It's when speech becomes oppressive at an institutional level. That's different. So someone in society should be able to say whatever they want, whether it's oppressive, offensive, within limits and outside of an organization. But once an organization like a university says, yes, we're going to allow someone to have oppressive speech, not just hate speech, oppressive speech on a campus, and we're endorsing it and we're allowing it to come, and if we're going to allow an organization to come because we're a public university, then that's different. And so a university saying, no, we're not going to allow that, and then saying, well, you're promoting a culture of victimhood, I completely disagree with that. I think that's
So you kind of that was a good counterexample, or not counter, partner example to the story you told about, like, fighting with your brother. And individually, you can say whatever you want, but you're saying, but once an institution is kind of putting a statement out on your behalf, or saying that, you know, we can say anything, it takes it to a different level.
Bringing oppressive people onto a campus where you shouldn't necessarily come to a university and then the university says, yeah, it's okay for the KKK to march through campus because it's freedom of speech.
Well, where should they go then?
Elsewhere.
Elsewhere, okay. Yes, you get the comment, then we're going to move on.
So how do you connect college and university and victimhood? Like usually those are more connected to empowerment and open minds, and now here is connected to victimhood. But is he make? I mean, I didn't really be honest. So
okay.
How he makes this connection? How is it?
Yeah, it definitely was on that point specifically of this discussion about whether college campuses should say no to certain groups or certain speakers because they represent certain political views, or make certain kinds of jokes in the case of comedians that people find to be possibly hate speech. And there's been discussions around that. So again, I really like all that you've been saying, but the author probably doesn't, because you need to be fixed. Again, we already figured out you were the problem, millennials, and you're broken, sad. Hashtag sad, hashtag mad. These are all things I'm quoting from the president. And you need to be liberated. So he says we must liberate them, which he means millennials. Let them be free to navigate the social world, make mistakes, fail, experience emotional pain, and learn to self-regulate fear and distress. So he wants to free you. Did this? Yes.
So what I get from that is, from the past, millennials never had a chance to test out that fight or flight syndrome. As far as, deal with coping mechanisms that cause that fear and that pain, because it's been a protected word.
Okay, so that's saying millennials are, they're being shielded so much, which it is his argument, that they're not being allowed to test out like where they stand on things.
Absolutely.
But that's not what everyone's been saying here.
But that's what that says.
But that's what that says. You're right. So are you saying you don't need to be liberated?
Well, I'm not millennial.
Okay.
I'm in the 40s. But the thing is, I agree with just about what everybody said up in there, because everybody have their own experiences and a whole context as far as school. But the thing is, what do they need to be liberated from? I mean, that's the question. What is the liberation?
The fear. But again, okay, so the question, what do they need to be liberated from? Yes?
No, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm just going to put down the thing that I see that's like the overarching theme of this article, it's the language, right? It's too absolute and objective when it's really subjective, where you see all these opinions in the room, right? And I think that's what it is. And then the language, it being so general and so absolute, it gets lost in that. And I think the point doesn't get across properly. So I just want to...
Okay, so you're saying that language is a big deal sometimes, and the one he's using here is not doing anything for anyone.
It's like a proclamation right there.
Yes.
It's
but you're being oversensitive, just like on the first slide.
I'm just acknowledging the language. Like I'm definitely not being oversensitive. I'm being defensive by saying that.
Okay. No, good. Okay, so I think at this point in the discussion, we've got a few more minutes left. So it's time to decide whether you're going to drop out of school, which is a great option if you need to get liberated, Or you could stay here. And as you may know, that the Office of Global Learning actually oversees a lot of your courses and makes sure that they incorporate global perspective, and that what you're getting out in terms of what you're learning includes awareness of not what's just going on here, but also globally. And you're getting a sense, or trying, I hope in your classes you're getting a sense of encouraging engagement to like participate in conversations and actions and do something with the knowledge and talents you have, and also to look at issues in perspective and break down how complex they are, compare situations and contexts, and get some kind of understanding from that. Because the goal is what's in the center, global citizenship, to think about yourself not as a citizen of Florida or the US, but of the world. And again, the international in Florida International University is probably what you signed up for, in the sense of like, yeah, I kind of agree with that. So, but there's also a Florida National University, right? Yeah, see, they're not for this. And in our office, Global Learning, the way that, this is a pretty easy definition of it, is that taking all this together, it's the process of diverse people collaboratively analyzing and addressing complex problems that transcend borders, that are problems everywhere, especially when you look at them in different ways. So I kind of added this in to say that the title of the presentation, right, Millennials as Global Citizens in Real Life, is to ask you, well, maybe sometimes you have more stress or anxiety, or maybe you're less quick to act because actually what you're doing is thinking about the world kind of in a bigger context picture. And so sometimes the thing to do is not to just spurt out what you think or to act right away, but to analyze, ask other people what they think. It's interesting that in the article, he talks about like the lack of independence. Well, the opposite of independence is collaboration, right, in a sense. So maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe you're not so afraid if you're willing to work in teams with people and ask their opinions. And getting back to the same concepts in our book, which really, whether you call it multiculturalism or whether you call it anti-racism or whether you call it global learning, it's really working towards the same goals. Understanding the complexity of the world and our interconnectedness and being able to unpack those things. So I think I wanted to draw the part at the bottom that when you have global awareness or global learning, you're understanding not only that we're connected in the good things, but also the bad things, and that affects how you think and act and do. So, to throw it back to education, and what I think universities represent is that university is there to make citizens who engage in democracy and participate, but that democracy isn't so simple, and there's ethical questions involved with that. That if you come away from learning, from education and your schooling, and you think democracy is like a simple, flat concept, that's almost a kind of miseducation, in that you didn't get the point, because the point is that things are not so simple. Even in the sense of what we're talking about, issues of how does one person represent somebody else, or represent a diverse group of people, or represent a city. And it's interesting when and I think millennials do this so much better than other generations. They think about, well, there's so many layers happening all at the same time, and they overlap. And so sometimes it can be, debilitating, that you're like, well, maybe I'm just going to do nothing because what can be done? And that's maybe a pessimistic take. And then other people have a pretty optimistic take of like, well, we should do something, and every little bit helps, and you have to start somewhere. Just learn this phrase that you can't eat an elephant in one bite. Like, it takes a while if you wanted to eat an elephant. Like, you just have to start, and then, eventually you can feed a family, multiple families. Anyway.
Say something about democracy real quick?
No.
Oh.
I'm kidding. Of course. Yes, please. Don't look at that.
That last slide was,
yes.
One of the definitions of democracy is majority rules.
Uh-huh.
And that's not always a good thing. And in this article, one of the first things he does is sort of equate democracy with freedom. And in some societies, the majority rule actually oppresses people. So in addition to but we think of a democracy, we need a strong constitution that protects people from the majority people. Right? In certain areas where a certain class or a certain color of people believe, well, we're the majority and we're going to vote and then we're going to oppress these people. Women can't drive in Saudi Arabia, or, apartheid, whatever the case may be. Whereas a constitution limits democracy, where democracy has, in theory, has certain good things about it and should be applied, but within the limits of a constitution that protects the people that aren't part of that majority.
Okay, so a little.
No.
I'm going to summarize what I think you're saying, which is I actually haven't heard said really what. So are you saying that the whole argument that we're giving up freedoms because we're compromising our rights doesn't make sense? Because even the idea of a constitution is an agreement that will all put the same limits in place, or that will all prioritize these rights, like in a way to protect. So did I understand that? More or less?
No, I guess what I'm trying to say is that democracy can also mean that the majority rules. And it's not just, we're represented by our elected. That's more of a republic.
Okay.
In a democracy, majority rules, and that's not always a good thing. It's not always a good thing. We can't equate democracy and freedom.
All right, and you took us back to where we started, that the big problem for you with the article was that democracy and freedom maybe are related, but they're not the same thing, and you can't equate them, and otherwise the argument falls apart. I just want to end, because I know we have to go, on the article's, what I thought was the thesis. Where again, remember, it's millennials. Why are you wary of freedom? And he says, fear pushes people to adopt a defensive posture. When people feel anxious, they're less open to diverse ideas and opinions, and less forgiving and tolerant of those they disagree with. When people are afraid, they cling to the certainty of the world they know and avoid taking physical, emotional, intellectual risks. In short, fear causes people to privilege psychological security over liberty. So, what are you going to say next time someone says, millennials, you're just, why don't you do something? Stop being so afraid. Because this is basically the thesis being presented to you. This is what's wrong with you.
But that whole explanation applies to everyone.
What? What do you mean it applies to everyone?
It's not a millennial issue, that's a human issue.
Are you saying you can think of people you've known or met or learned about that perhaps also had to learn these concepts? Okay, so it's not just a millennial issue. All right, I like that. What else? How about another takeaway today that we can all go out of here feeling good? So I like that. So we're going to respond. Next time someone says, millennials, you'd be like, it's not just our issue. You're doing the same thing.
Not all millennials are the same. It's not a homogeneous group.
We're not all the same. I like that. Yes. What else?
You came to the wrong university.
You came to the wrong university. Okay, I think that's where we'll end it. Thank you so much for having me and for participating. I love the discussion. And if you ever want to drop by, we're just in PC in this horrible hallway in the back on the second floor. But you'll find us. Just look. And again, if you connect on Twitter, it's @Mariusz EDU. Thank you again.